Got you.
Okay. Hold on just a minute. Where are we? Here we go. All right.
There we
You
go.
have that.
And boom. Oh,
Toad Sage, what's going on? Pleasure to have you. Okay, good. The chat is working. It does seem somewhat delayed, but that's okay. How's everyone doing today? Exciting stream. We have my guy, the one, the only, Iron Nancy. What's going on, man?
shalom. I am here. Hello, hello, hello.
Give us a few minutes as we gather ourselves, as we get ready, as we share streams and whatnot. The excitement is going to start in just a few minutes. And also, we'll let people hop in. As we're waiting, how's everybody doing tonight?
Let's see what's going on in the chat here. Let me see what's happening. Toad Sage. Oh my goodness. That's a regular right there.
Damn straight.
Let me see.
Ninja DX, what's going on? Pleasure to have you. Is that a black clover icon I see? Cultured. By the way, man, are you caught up with Black Clover?
You know, saw that movie. That was pretty cool.
The movie was dope. We'll give everyone a couple minutes before we get started.
Don't want to dive in too quick. Be like, where you at?
Yeah, exactly. Everyone comes in and they're like, all right, we're ready for the stream. And we're like, all right, cool, we're wrapping up.
Should have been here 2 hours ago.
Oh my God. It happens so often. People like join a stream and they'll be like, hey bro, I had work. I see you're like an hour and a half into the stream, but can you just tell me what you talked about? It's like, bro, just watch it at that point.
Yeah. Let me give you a 5-minute summary and stream.
Not
Figure
even.
it out on your own.
I give them the 2-second summary. I'll be like, so yeah, it was a weekly Shonen Jump stream, and we talked about some weekly Shonen Jump. Find out more next week.
We read some manga. What'd you expect?
Yeah, seriously. While we're waiting, how's the audio for everyone who's listening? Also, for everyone in chat right now, make sure to like the stream. Lets me know that you're enjoying the stream, and of course, it helps spread the stream to everyone else. Luke, what's going on? Pleasure to have you. Audio is fine? All right, cool. Yeah, because before the stream, the music was acting up on my end. But thank you for that. Luke, I'm curious to hear what you think about the end of Eden Zero, because I wasn't caught up, and I don't know where you were at with it. So,
is Luke a big Eden Zero fan or no?
Last I recall, he was following it every week, I'm pretty sure. There were more than a few regulars on the channel, even when I wasn't doing mostly Eden. So when I wasn't in my Eden 0 stage, there was a bunch of people who were following it before me. But I wasn't caught up at all. Oh, never mind. Sorry. Oops.
Luke, you're letting the team down, dog.
Look, man, I just finished binging Cyberpunk Edge Runners, so my brain is a little mush. Speaking
All
of
good.
which, talk about good anime.
I wouldn't know, but
Oh my god.
I hear it's good. I hear great things.
It's so good.
Yeah. I heard that the main character is tweaking out in the final episode or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. I wanted to get into Cyberpunk for ages, and I just never made the time to do it. And then they announced that that character Lucy is going to be in the next season pass for Guilty Gear Strive, which is my favorite game. So when they did that, I was like, all right, time to watch this anime. And it's so good. Okay. It's like easily one of the best anime Trigger has ever done.
You play the game or no?
I just started the game. That was another thing. I didn't buy the game when it came out, and then I just never really made the time to start it. So I'm only just starting it now. OG, you enjoyed the Cyberpunk Edge Runners anime? Oh my god, easily. Like I don't know that I put it in my top 20, but I loved it. We got JK Network in the chat. What's going on, man? Closest thing to the modern day Eden 0 Hive leader. And we'll talk about that.
Well, before we talk about that, what's Luke talking about? What does that mean?
What did Luke say? If I'm letting the Eden 0 team down, then others are letting the 100 Girlfriends team down. Luke is a big fan of 100 Girlfriends. He's a big fan of that manga.
Oh, I thought he was talking about like real. That's a series?
Yeah, you haven't heard of that?
100 Girlfriends?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before.
Well, someone's got homework tonight.
100 Girlfriends? I think I might pass that one.
Are you really surprised that that's an anime? Are you really surprised?
I shouldn't be, but you know.
All right, I'm gonna take a quick sip of water, and then we'll get this started.
You got it. Is the Cyberpunk anime canon to the game? As an expert, yes. All extended media is canon, no matter what anyone says. All those Dragon Ball movies, they're canon too, dude. Every single one of them. Canon's just a matter of feeling at the end of the day. Do you feel like this is real? Do you feel like it's accurate? Then the answer is yes.
I agree with all those things, but also in the topic of Cyberpunk, I haven't played enough of the game to know, but from what I know about the game and from what I saw in the anime, it's like, it's at the very least canon congruent. Like, it doesn't really touch on any of the major plot points, and it's consistent with everything in the game. Like, it even mentions people who are actually in the game, so it seems pretty canon to me. But again, it's like they're like worlds apart. Like, one's an anime, one's the actual game. If you want to make believe it's canon, great. If it bothers you that it's an anime, then it doesn't have to be canon. But
it's like it could be canon or it could not be. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
Right, exactly. Just enjoy what you enjoy. But on that note, let's get this started. So, he's a man above words. So if you don't know him, shocking. But let's do a brief introduction. My guy, he is the one, the only Iron Nancy. He does fairy tale content. He does a bunch of other content. And most importantly for tonight, he did Eden 0 content. That was how I found him. That's how a lot of people found him. But obviously he does more than that. So Iron Nancy, quick 2 seconds, just introduce yourself to anyone who might not have heard of you in the chat.
What is up, everyone? Iron Nancy here. Just that guy. I make like videos. I mean, Shonen said it all. Like, you know, there's more to me than that, but it is what it is. Don't worry about it. I'm just here. I'm here to have fun.
Eloquently said. So, let me just give you a rough roadmap for the stream. Nothing too strict, nothing too, bullet point. Basically, the first half of the stream, this will be like a 2-hour stream ish. The first half, we're going to talk about the final chapter, the last arc ish of Eden Zero, address everyone's thoughts, share our thoughts, take questions on that. And then for the final half, so the last hour of the stream, we want to kind of go back, go back to chapter 1, talk about what it was like getting into the series, what our thoughts are now that it's been like a month since this chapter has come out, kind of talk about the state of the community, how it kind of changed over these, 5 years the series has been going, something like that, and just take general questions. So let's start by talking about that final chapter. Mr. Iron Nancy. I'll start with a hot take. It can change throughout the stream, but just to start things off, what would you rate chapter 293 on a scale of 1 to 10 for everyone on the internet to roast you on?
Since we're not doing like a series rating yet, right? We're just doing the individual chapter. As a chapter itself, I think it's fine, but as like a final chapter, in my personal opinion, I also think it's just okay. But for what a final chapter is supposed to be for a series with almost 300 chapters, I think objectively, I'd probably be lying if I said that the ball wasn't dropped just a tad bit. Right? I think that the chapter, like it hit the notes that it probably needed to hit, the main most important ones, but there was a lot of stuff kind of left out, unfortunately. So because of that, I'm gonna give it like a conservative 6 out of 10.
Yeah, that's right where I am. I was going to give it like a 7. I don't really think you can go lower than 6. Now, for context, again, I was behind when this chapter dropped. I was like 20 chapters behind. So unfortunately, not according to plan, I did not read this chapter the week it came out. So I wasn't really engaged with the discourse that was taking place when this chapter dropped. So we can kind of talk about that. But I'd say, I don't know what I know people were upset with some of the things that happened in this chapter, but I really don't think you can give it less than like a 5. And even a 5, I'm like, okay, come on now. But let me ask you this. Where do you think this chapter fell short?
Well, like I said, I think it hit the main beats that it needed to hit in order for it to be considered like a final chapter. But really, I think one of the main things that probably made most people disappointed in this chapter was the fact that we didn't get like those fan service moments. Yeah, we kind of caught up with the Eden Zero crew, but the world that Mashima had built is so, I mean, it's not extremely vast, but there are quite a few characters that he made us develop a relationship with along this journey. And so the fact that we only got to catch up with the Eden Zero crew and that was kind of it. It's like, okay, but what about everybody else in the universe? What about the Eratian Sace Interstellar? What about even me, who's a Creed hater? What about Creed? What happened to him? What's really going on with Weiss and Hermit? Like, what's happening? We didn't even get to see the baby. So I think I've said this numerous times already, but we hit some of the beats that we needed to hit, but the fan service really should have been there for like a final chapter of a manga. Let us see the stuff that we want to see outside of just what's kind of happening at that time with the main crew.
Yeah, there were definitely things in this chapter that I wanted to see and just weren't there. One of the things you brought up, something that was big for me. One of the things that bothered me in sort of the later parts of Eden Zero was, especially after these new timelines, like Homura and Creed, right? Creed was the one from the what was Homura's homeland?
Uh,
Was it
uh,
was it Edo?
Osu? It started with an O. Or Edo, but
Oh,
one of
Edo.
those.
Yeah,
It was
yeah, yeah,
based off of Edo, Japan.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Creed is the one from the same place as Homura, right? Am I crazy?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was such a big plot point in the Aoi War, right? Like they kind of had this thing going, and then, you know, Creed gets killed, and then Homer is like, "Oh my god, everyone like that I even talked to gets killed, and it's all my fault," right? And then once they reset the timelines, like nothing comes of that, and then in this last arc, we kind of just find out that he helped her out and that he's alive, but like nothing else happens, right? So it kind of speaks to this recurring theme in the ending of Eden Zero where like Mashima did more than the bare minimum for sure, but there were a lot of things that felt more important in the earlier parts of Eden Zero, and by the time you got to the final chapter, it felt more like Mashima was just addressing them and not to kind of flesh them out for fans. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just based off of the fact that like Elsie, who's not an Erza copy, but she emulates Erza a lot. I mean, she looks like her. But like the fact that somebody that was that important that showed up in like chapter 2 didn't even get like a couple of lines in this final chapter. It's like what happened? I know he did more than the bare minimum, but like, was there like a rush to get this out? Was there a rush to get this finished? Did he just want to be done with Eden Zero and move on to bigger and better things?
I remember
I
him
don't know.
saying that I don't I, I don't remember exactly where I saw it, but there was something like him saying like, "Oh no, I'm not rushing anything. Like I'm hitting everything that I planned." So I think a lot of what happened with this ending is he planned out the story. Like you can tell especially early on that so much of this was planned, but I think he added more to the story than he originally anticipated. So I think what happened was a lot of the stuff that people liked wasn't as planned out as he thought. So by the time he got to the final arc and the final chapters, he had all the stuff that he probably threw in that he didn't plan for in the ending. So my gut feeling says that like a lot of the stuff that we're like, where the hell is this, right? It's just kind of him being like, oh, yeah, here's this thing that I made earlier, but I didn't add it in the ending, 5 years ago. So I'm just going to kind of like um, reference it. That's my theory, at least. I don't know what your theory is.
Um, my theory is, I'm probably one of Mashima's biggest critiques because I, for the most part, read almost all of his work, and for a really long time, I've always said that like as much as I admire Mashima's work ethic and his ability to pump out all this content that is well above average and actually very, very good at times, I think it's still a drawback to be working on so many different projects at the exact same time because one way or another, the quality is going to drop. So I think that maybe as like he saw the sales of Eden Zero not being to what he might have wanted them to be, that series just became a little bit less and less important over time. And so once the final chapter came around, he hit all the beats that he needed to do, and now this is just past him, so that he can focus on other stuff like Fairy Tail and Dead Rock. I mean, Fairy Tail's anime just came out, so, and I don't think it started before Eden Zero ended, but it was around that time, so.
I think part of it too, because you'll see this with a lot of manga that end, like, the magic isn't always there in those final chapters, right? Personally, this final arc felt somewhat similar to the final arc of Dr. Stone. Um, like, it just felt like we were hitting beats and not really, like, you know, trying to make it like cinematic in a sense. But I think part of it is just like, I mean, as creative people ourselves, we can kind of attest to it. Whenever you start something, that's where all the fun is, because it's new, it's exciting. You're thinking about like the potential, right? Whenever you see people start a new manga, they're always like, "Oh, the series has so much potential." And then when you go to finish something, you're just like, "Oh God, I'm still doing this." Like, especially a guy like Mashima, where he's got like 3 other projects, right? It's like he doesn't like, not that he doesn't care, but like in his head, like he's done, it's over. So, he doesn't, as much as he probably still loves Eden Zero, you don't have the same motivation as when you started.
Yeah, yeah. And even though I want to, like, I can go on and on about, talking about the negatives of the chapter, but I do also want to give like a bit of praise to it, because the way that he handled the whole Pino situation, I think, is really well written, and to me that shows that he did, like, at least care about this final chapter, and he still did have some love for this series. As far as if we'll see any more from Eden Zero after this, I highly doubt it, unless we're gonna get like a Heroes 2 or anything like that, but I can tell that there was still at least some amount of love and some care put into this final chapter, that he wanted to give a semi-decent goodbye to the series.
Oh, for sure, 100%. I definitely agree. You kind of have to imagine that, like, there's a different kind of energy by the end of it, as opposed to like when you start it, it's fresh, you see everyone getting excited about it, right? That kind of thing. Somebody in chat, I want to point this out if you didn't see it. Somebody in chat said about Creed. Where is it? Where is it?
Luke,
Oh, no. Ninja DX234 said final chapter was 10 out of 10 because Creed didn't show up.
I'd let you go on that whole Creed thing earlier, but I gotta be honest.
Yeah, no,
Again,
I can appreciate
as the
it.
biggest Creed hater on the planet,
God.
I'm happy he didn't show up.
So this is a good comment as a sort of launching pad for what I want to get into next. JK said, I know people were upset with the Pino death fake out. I'm fine with it because it followed the themes of the series, that it doesn't matter whether you are human or a machine. So I'll ask you, but let me start this one. Again, I don't know what people were saying. I just can kind of infer based on this comment and also what the general vibes were after this chapter dropped. But my impression I got from the community was people were upset with what happened with Pino in the final chapter for 2 reasons. One, because it was a fake out death, right? That was the big one. Because, it was proposed as this like big final death, like a big death of one of the main characters to end the series. And then, like we just take it back, like, haha, just kidding, right? And the other thing, I don't know how many people might have been upset for this reason, but another thing to consider is that, like, for 200 chapters, almost 300 chapters, we're told that Pino's dream is to be human, right? And then when she finally gets that opportunity, she's like, no, never mind. That's stupid. Right? So if you had your mind set on Pino, being a human, like actual Pino, right? Like Pino, the Pino we know, the Pino we followed, turning into a human in the final chapter, and then you saw this, understandably, you could be disappointed. So I have a few things to say about that. As far as the fake out death, it ended as fast as it started. So in that sense, I'm not really upset. Because, like, first of all, it comes out of nowhere. Like, everyone's like, everything's settled. It's the end of the story. It's like the second to last chapter. And then Pino's like, all right, bye. Right? If it's not the second to last chapter, it's like the third to last chapter. It's not like, at the beginning of the arc, what's the character's name? Zero or Void. Void showed up and was like, hey, I'm going to start killing everyone left and right, and shoots Pino to start off the final arc, right? And then she comes back at the end of the arc. It's not like that. It's like she was gone one chapter, and then the very next chapter, she came back. So there wasn't really that, like, time for impact, I guess, right? As a reader, you can make the argument story-wise, but, like, the story's over, So that's why I'm not upset about it. And also, like, let's be honest, it's a Mashima series. It's the end of a Mashima series. Like, we could have reasonably expected a happy ending for everybody. As far as, like, the Pino being human thing, I wasn't upset about it because I thought it was a nice twist. For starters, that's one. Reason number two, I, like JK, liked what they did with the whole staying in theme with the story. And also, it was a nice character moment for Pino precisely because Pino wanted to be human for so long, for her to be like, you know what, I'm happy as the person I am. Like, this is who I've been for so long. Why would I change that? I thought that was a really good character moment for Pino, and also to end as a final note. And then the other thing, right, is we did technically get human Pino. It wasn't our Pino, but we got the best of both worlds. So in one sense, you can argue it was a cop-out, but in the other sense, we got the best of both worlds. But what do you think? Where do you stand on that?
As far as the whole Pino fake out death thing, I had always figured, because we knew that Mother was going to grant a wish at the end of the Eden Zero journey. Like, that was always supposed to be a thing. And after seeing what everybody else's wishes were, I was like, oh yeah, Pino's the one that was going to get the wish. So when she died, but a wish was still on the table, I was like, oh yeah, Pino's coming back. There was never a thought in my mind that it was like, oh, Pino's gone. Oh, it was like, we still have the wish. That's still a factor in the story. And yeah, as far as her deciding to stay as a robot, I think that was excellent character development as well. I thought it was great. She understood and recognized that she doesn't gain value as a human because humans and robots are on an equal playing field. They're on an equal scale. They both have intrinsic value. They both have hearts. I do think it was well, I do think it was great character development. I also found it kind of weird that, like, she didn't just ask to be like made as a human. Like, it was either she just went back and became alive as a robot, or she became Shiki and Rebecca's baby. It's kind of like a weird situation. Like, you can't just make me my own body and then just put me in that.
Yeah.
But I guess, it's the rules of the universe, so.
Yeah, I can kind of see what you mean. Like, it seemed a little binary for some people.
Yeah.
Something you brought up before, and then something JK brought up just now, was another reason people didn't like the way it was structured is because it kind of, well, it didn't kind of, it did take away from the baby, Rebecca and uh,
Yeah, yeah. Shiki and Rebecca's
Shiki.
baby. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know why I blanked on that. Shiki and Rebecca's kid. Like, it was the whole point of the final chapter. And then Pino's like, "Oh my god, guys, I'm back!" And everyone's like, "Oh, cool!" And they like throw the baby out the window. Like, you know what I mean? Um,
Yeah,
it
the whole point was like, I'm not going to take the position of the baby. But in all actuality, in from like a story and a viewing perspective, you did, because we don't even get the baby's name or to see what it looks like.
it's weird because, like, in another story, it wouldn't have been such a big deal. But the reason it was such a big deal is because with all the timeline stuff and all the time loops, it was always a big deal, like, who was part of, like, families, right? Like, Shiki is connected to Ziggy, and they're connected to Witch, who's not really Witch, and they're like also connected to Mother, and they're connected to, so like family, like the whole family tree. It's not just like fan service, right? Like, it's not like fans like, oh, we like the characters, like we want to see you know like a cute slice of life chapter where like they're at home. Like, no, like it was a major plot point for at least several arcs, and then you go to set up like the final landing, and you don't give people like, okay, so what's the name of this kid gonna be, right? Because for hundreds of chapters we get a bunch of stories behind Shiki's name, and like we find out like why Shiki was named Shiki. So then when it comes time to name Shiki's kid, we don't get the name, right? Like, we don't know. Like, it was proposed that it was going to be named Pino, but now that Pino's back, like, are they going to still do Pino? Were they going to be like, well, actually, you know what? Never mind. We're going to do Witch? It's like there was no reason for that to be left unanswered or left vague.
Yeah, I also think one of the things that might have made people a little bit upset when it comes to the baby is because, I'm to compare it to Fairy Tale, like, we know what Natsu and Lucy's kid looks like. We know what Ray and Juvia looks like. We know their names in 100 Years Quest. We've actually met them. So, like, we know a whole lot about the next generation of this one series that Mashima has, but you can't even get like a sneak preview of the character in this series. Like, we can't get anything. That's what it just. I really just don't understand the thought process behind showing literally nothing about the kid. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't. I would have liked to have been in the editor's room for the writing of that final chapter. Be like, okay, like the shippers, that we finally gave him Weiss and Hermit, and we gave him Shiki and Rebecca, but we're not going to do anything with either of them, and we're not even going to show the kid.
Speaking of Weiss and Hermit, I don't think I saw anyone else talk about this. Can we talk about Wise? Like, I am still not convinced that that character with Hermit was Wise. Like, what the hell was going on with that haircut? Am I wrong? Like, am I living in Shonen OG world? Like, everyone else is like, oh yeah, cool, he got a haircut. And like, I'm just like, what the hell is that?
I don't think it's a terrible haircut, but I don't think it's anywhere near, like, he's had like 3 haircuts in the series. That one's at the bottom of the list for sure.
I was just like,
Because like
why
he was only
though?
in the chapter for like 2 pages.
Like,
Why? I don't know.
if I was, part of the Eden Zero crew, right? Like, if I was, let's say I'm Couch Po for a day, right? and I pull up to the anniversary, right? I pull up to the baby shower, and I see Wise. I would just be like, okay, but why though? Like, who told you to do
What
this?
happened?
Like, what happened, right? Like, did you guys have a fight? Like, I'd look to Hermit and be like, did you guys have a fight or like break up and he did this while you broke up? Like, what is this? What's going on? It's like that friend who, like, you go on summer break and then you come back and they like dyed their hair blue. And you're like, okay, what kind of call of attention is this? Like, what are you doing? I don't know. I saw that and I was like, oh no. Oh no.
So Mans was going through a tough day. Maybe he lost a bet or something. I don't know. You know, I don't even know if they're married. I was gonna say marriage changes a man, but I don't know if these two are even married.
I will say, as much as I hated that, I loved that we saw that he and Hermit were on the same planet, which, you know, it's not black and white, but for all the shippers out there, it does kind of imply that, you know, they moved in together, or at the very least, they're kind of spending their days together, which, at least in a shonen manga, is as close as you're going to get to like a, hey, you know, they're married, they're a couple.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a whole lot more could have been done with it. Like, I don't want to bring up any spoilers, but like in other series in Shonen Jump, they've done a whole lot more with it. So I feel Mashima definitely could have done more with it. And for the love of God, I hope he doesn't do anything like this for when, for when, you know, the same sort of thing happens in Fairy Tail, because I'm gonna be logging off the internet for a couple of days.
Well, even just look at the end of Fairy Tail. Like, you don't even have to look at 100 Years Quest. Look at the end of Fairy Tail. You know, Gray and Juvia had been this like tease of a ship for hundreds of chapters, and then in the final chapter, like, you do get to see them as a couple, kind of, sort of, right? Like, you do get Gray being like,
Yeah.
you know, hey, you know, you're gonna be my girlfriend. So, and then Juvia's like, right? It's not like this thing that's just like, you know, left super vague.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I'll say about this final chapter, especially since I had just binged Rave Master from beginning to end a few months ago, this final chapter felt more like the end of Rave than it did Fairy Tail. Because when you, and spoiler alert, I'll do my best, but spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read the end of Rave. In the end of Rave, like, you do get sort of a time skip thing going on, right? And you get sort of like a family reunion moment where everyone had kind of gone their separate ways, and it's like, oh, how have you been in the last, you know, 2 years, right? And then you kind of get this, like, not fake out, but like, oh my god, you're back moment, right? So this final chapter of Eden Zero hit a lot of the same vibes, because in the Rave chapter, Ellie was a student, right? Like, she was a student with, I can't remember. It's been a, you know, however long since I read the chapter, but she was a student. I feel like somebody else was in school with her or something like that. And then in this chapter, Rebecca is a student, and, you know, the Earth Pino is a student, and the Earth Shiki is a student, and like all that. And like, it hit similar vibes. It wasn't a carbon copy, but the, like, if you're a Rave fan and you love Rave, and then you read this chapter, you're like, this feels really familiar. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute. I feel like there was something else. I think it was just the Pino thing too. The Pino thing, it definitely was different from what happened in Rave for sure. But It was
Well, I
similar.
haven't read, not to cut you off, but
No, no,
I
no, go
haven't
ahead.
read Rave. So who would be like the equivalent of Pino in Rave? Would it be like that snowman with like the carrot nose?
No, I really can't give it away. Like if I say who, it's kind of a spoiler. Um it's not, again, it's not even like a direct parallel. It's more the nature of the twist than it is like what happened to a certain character, because there's a big twist in the end of Rave where people think one thing, where the characters think it's one way, and then in the final chapter they're like, oh, wait, what? And
Oh, okay.
in that sense, this chapter felt more like the end of Rave. Yeah, it's a huge spoiler, so
And this
I
sounds
can't
like a
really
good
say.
series. I should read it one day.
Rave is so good, man. It's so good. No, I'm not gonna spoil it. It is, I will say, it's fairly obvious by the time you get to it. Like, I'm no, I'm gonna be good. I'm not gonna spoil it. I'll let
I
you.
mean, you can spoil it if you want to.
No, 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 no. I have people
It-
say. um, I have people saying I should just spoil it, but I want to let people reach that conclusion for themselves. But bottom
okay.
line, before I go on for too long, is that at least as someone who had been, because that was the thing, I binged Rave Master, and then I binged Fairy Tale, like a month or two before catching up to Eden Zero. So having done all that, this final chapter felt a lot more like Rave. So for me, that was something I liked about it.
Oh, that was something you liked. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was something I liked about it. It was like a callback to Rave.
Yeah. I I haven't finished Rave. I think it was on like volume 4, something like that. I don't know. I can't talk about Rave too much because people will get upset at for me for not finishing the series. So, you know, I'm glad that Mashima, because apparently the ending of Rave was good. So, if we got some parallels to it, and that's good, and this is kind of good, then it's all good.
So JK is bringing up, can we also talk about how Void was straight up erased? Shiki and Rebecca had a daughter, not a son, so Void is just gone and forgotten.
You
Is that true?
What'd you say? You cut out for me there for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Um, so JK in the chat said, can we also talk about how Void was straight up erased? Shiki and Rebecca had a daughter, not a son, so Void is just gone and forgotten.
Yeah. Uh.
Is that true? I feel like that's not 100% true.
Well, the whole timeline thing in Eden Zero, it just, there's some wanting there, but maybe it's just because I don't have a full understanding of it, and I'll probably need to go back and reread a bit of it. Yeah, Void was Shiki and Rebecca's son, quote unquote, and he died, and their new kid is a daughter. That's why Pino was going to be their kid, because it was a girl.
Well, you also have.
Yeah, Void is gone.
Well, wouldn't it technically be the child of Earth Shiki and Earth Rebecca? Because isn't that how that worked? Or am I confusing it? Because jog my memory. How was Void created? Because Ziggy is really Shiki. So then how did Void get created? That's what I'm saying.
You, I don't remember. I think all I know is that he called himself basically the son of Rebecca and Shiki. I'm going to take his word at it, and that's what Mashima wanted to write. I mean, at the end of the day, look, I'll be 110% completely honest here. I don't really care about Void. Right? Mashima, that's one of the worst villains he's ever made, in my opinion. There was a whole bunch of potential. He had a great introduction. He looked cool. All the pieces were there. And it really just kind of amounted to nothing. It was cool to see Ziggy come back and fight his son, but like, yikes. He was from that 20,000 years in the future type thing. That was
Right. No, I knew generally where he came from. It's just they did the time loop so many times, it was hard to keep straight by the end of it.
Yeah.
Another question.
Xenolith explained it in the chat. He said Void was inside Rebecca from 20,000 years in the future. He died along with her and traveled back in time. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Xenolith. So, another question for you. What did you think of the final fights? So, there was the, we got Cure round 2. We got Freya. Of course, we got Void. I might be missing one or two more. What did you think of those final fights?
I thought the Hamura one was really good. I liked the art in that one. I thought the Shiki and Rebecca one was pretty good too. And then I thought the Void versus Ziggy one was... It looked cool. It was like the first time we had like two robot big badass characters fighting. But I think that one might be on the lower end of the list just because of, again, how much of a letdown Void was. I think the best one was probably Shiki versus Chrono Rebecca. That one was probably the best. We got that really cool Shiki feat too.
Yeah, that one was pretty hype.
It might be a tie between that one and Hamura one with Freyr, because I really like the art of how that one ends with all that fire around Hamura as she's doing that final slice. It looked really cool. Witch versus Wizard, that one was okay.
Yeah, that one was all right. It started off strong, but I feel like, as far as I remember, I have to go back and look at it. My impression of it in the moment is like it was just a lot of transforming and not a whole lot of fighting. Like, it was just them taking turns, like, well, I have this transformation. Well, I have this transformation. No, well, my transformation's better than your transformation. What? You have that transformation? Impossible. Like...
There was a bit of that going around with the androids in that final fight. Ziggy was doing a bit of that.
For the two main things people didn't like about this final arc were the fights didn't get any better, and people didn't like the stuff with Pino. At least for my perspective. I don't know if you saw people talking about other stuff, but for me, people seemed really pissed off about the fights, and people seemed pretty pissed off about what happened with Pino. Other than that, I mean, again, I think based on everything we've talked about, I think a 6 or a 7 is pretty fair for this chapter.
Yeah. Mashima did what he did. There's things to like. I'd say there's more things that you can appreciate and like about this final chapter than to dislike and hate about it. I think if you're walking away feeling more negative about the final chapter than positive, I'd say put your personal biases aside and just read it for what it actually is.
Yeah, that's a big thing with any manga, not just endings, right? Like, people, especially in the final arcs, have these expectations for what they want it to look like. So then when it's not what they were expecting it to be, they're like, okay, so this actually sucks. And I think especially with the series like Eden Zero, where it sets so much stuff up, I think because it didn't do everything people wanted it to, they were, and this was true for a lot of the chapters, not just this final arc, because it didn't do everything people wanted it to, everyone was quick to be like, oh, Mashima fumbled, Eden Zero fell off, Eden Zero sucks, the ending sucks, this, that. And I'm just like, when you really look back, it's consistent with the rest of the story. You know, 95% of the characters got a cameo in those last few chapters. So I really can't give it anything less than like a 6. And I think over time, I think people will come around.
Um, I think so. I just don't know who's gonna come back to the series to come around. That's my only thing.
That is a perfect transition because that is actually what I wanted to talk about next. So I think, at least right now, we've kind of, pulled apart everything we want to out of the final chapter. So now I want to start the real retrospective. I want to talk about Eden Zero in full, the last, what has it been, like 5, 6 years, right? It's been
Yeah,
like
5 or 6. Yeah.
it's been like 5 years ish. Um, the first thing I want to talk about is the community. So this community has gone through a lot because when I started Eden Zero, my first impression of Eden Zero fans was when the anime started. Um, you know, anyone who criticized it or called it like a fairy tale clone, there was toxicity for sure. But that was just me on the outside looking in. I had not started it yet. So I started it in like I'd say 2020 ish. So um I don't know where the story was quite then. I believe it was uh just before
2020, I'm pretty sure was a war. I think, like right at the start of it.
the
Pretty
Owie
sure.
War.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think. So it was right before the Owie War. Now, when I started Eden Zero, the community wasn't like massive necessarily, but um, like when I said, "Hey guys, I checked out Eden Zero, it seems really fun," I got like such a big response from people where I was like, "Oh, that's great, that's awesome, yeah, we love Eden Zero, we're glad to see people checking it out," and that was the vibe, right? So that was 2020-ish when I started, and going into Owie War, the vibe of the Eden Zero community was so good. I mean, it was just as good as like any community at their peak. Like every week, people were losing their minds over chapters. You could go on Twitter, YouTube, even Reddit, name your platform. People were talking about that chapter, theories, discussions, analysis, whatever. That was the case for Owie War. Then we had the I forget the name of the next Cosmos, but the one where Ziggy was like the true villain of the arc, the next war.
It's just called the Lendard arc.
Lendard, yep. So Lendard. We had Lendard. And, everyone was still hyped for that arc. Kaede, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you. It was the Kaede War. You know, similar to Owie War, people are like, all right, Eden Zero, Ziggy's finally making his move. We're getting a lot of anticipation. We're finally getting questions to what's going on with all this time travel stuff. And then by the end of Kaede War, there was a slow drop off. Like, after Kaede War, let's see. I'm trying to keep it to the story. So after the Kaede War, we enter the Universe Zero saga when they start the second to last time loop, I think. No. Trying to remember. Yeah. Something like that, right? So they start another time loop. It's around that time that, like, now people, like, for the last 50 chapters, 100 chapters, they've been having the same problems with the series. It just keeps happening and happening and happening. And Kaede War, it's all the same problems that people have. So by this point, when none of that really gets answered, people kind of just lose interest in Eden Zero. Nobody's really like, oh, it fell off. Nobody's like, oh, it's bad. People just kind of start dropping it. So by the time we're in, I'd say 2021, 2022, um, I was kind of coming back to it because I had dropped it at that point, just because I had dropped a lot of manga at that point, not because of anything going on in Eden Zero. And like I was going on Twitter, and like the community was, I mean, gone, right? A lot of the people who were posting links to chapters weren't doing it anymore. A lot of the people who were turning up for like weekly conversations were nowhere to be seen anymore. The community just like fell off the face of the earth, basically. Fast forward to like a month ago, like I feel like almost no one was really there for the final send off. So, as I look back on the Eden Zero community, it the evolution of the community kind of says it all for this series, where it started off strong, hit insane peaks, and then kind of just tapered off into complete radio silence. We talked about before the stream, you know, you were a big part of the community, and then you took a break, and then when you came back, you were like, where the hell did everyone go, right?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, yeah. When well, just to start at the very beginning, Eden Zero really got that boost in popularity through controversy right at the start. It wasn't a giant boost, but I believe the first volume sold like 100,000 copies or something like that, which is pretty impressive. And the controversy was, the whole fairy tale 2.0 type thing. It was
Yep.
a bunch of nonsense. And then, as time goes on, we had that big spike with Drake and Joe when he shot and killed Shiki. That
Mm-hmm.
still one of the most shocking chapters I've ever read to this day. Is insane. And then, fast forward through that, then we get to the Awoi War. And that is truly, even if you have a favorite arc or you don't think that one's as good, you think it's a little bit too edgy, all opinions aside, that is the highest peak that Eden Zero has ever reached. It's not at the same level that JJK is now in terms of leak nights, but it was pretty big whenever there were chapters coming out during the Nero 66 arc. There was a sizable amount of people tuning in every so often. And then when you had Witch die at the end of that arc, that was one of the most insane days of all time. I'll tell you that much right now. And then I think at I think it was near the start of the time skip. That's really where, and I think the time skip, even though people were excited and happy about it, I think that's really where the downtick started to happen. Because not a whole lot, and when I was still around at that time, I was around for the time skip, not a whole lot really changed. Like, we had a few costume design switches, but like, I don't want to keep making comparisons to Fairy Tail, but Natsu and the rest of them were changing outfits every other arc, right? But you go over here to Eden Zero and we just get some slight tweaks in character designs and not really much. And character designs do play a big part in people's wanting to keep reading and watching the series because these characters will look cool. But anyways, you fast forward after that, then I take the whole 6-month break thing, and I come back after that time, and the community is just a shell of its former self. And I could tell by reading the chapters why the community sorta kinda just dissipated. And it was because even though the Cade War had some pretty great moments, overall, it just wasn't really what it was supposed to be. Like when you think of memorable time skips in anime, you can point out the amazing moments and what it did for the characters. But then you have Cade War, and you just see all of these writing mistakes piling up one after the other, like the handling with Jesse and Elsie's two like crewmates, the firefighter, like the ice and fire guy. They had nothing to them, and they just got beheaded by Jesse. uh Noella, oh my gosh. That was not good. uh and the shining stars, or not the shining stars, the dark stars, they weren't really handled all that well either. So it's like a lot of the writing, really almost all of the writing outside of anything that had to do with Shiki and Ziggy, wasn't up to par. Not even in terms of like up to par with other ongoing series. It just wasn't up to par with how great Eden Zero had been all that time.
Yeah.
So even even though I took that break and came back, it was like I could see why people kind of fell off of the series, because Mashima just wasn't keeping. Not only was he not elevating the quality, he wasn't even keeping the quality at the same level of the stuff that had come before.
Yeah, I think there was a mass exodus of fans for a lot of different reasons, but generally what it came down to was by the time you get to the Kaede War, and especially into that time skip, or rather, that next time loop, you just get this feeling that, like, something's different, right? Like, you talked about the Drac and Joe moment earlier. I still think about how, like, to this day, that's almost one of the biggest, like, it's not almost one of, it is one of the biggest peaks in the series. And in a lot of ways, looking back, it's almost like okay, this is where, you know, this is as dark as it's going to get, because in Aoi War, it gets really dark. But aside from, like, the witch moment, right? Because, like, with witch, you know, with witch's moment, it's shocking for a different reason. There's never a moment quite like the Drac and Joe moment with Shiki, where you turn the page and you're like, right? Like, that almost never happens again. So by the time you get to the end of Kaede War, you're kind of just like, whether you're consciously thinking it or not, you're kind of just like, yeah, it's just not hitting like it used to. And that's kind of where my head was at. But I definitely agree. By Kaede War, it felt like we were just hitting a lot of the same points, you know, not making up for a lot of the same mistakes. And I think that's kind of why people just lost interest. It just felt like a lot of the same.
Yeah, and speaking of the Drake and Joe killing, right? Like that for me, I don't know if it's a toss up between Witch's death and Shiki's death, or like really well executed moments and really big moments and peaks of the series. But outside of those two moments, in the following arcs, what even comes close to those two moments? There's really nothing. Like I can't really think of anything that even comes close to those that I mean, maybe not even. I was gonna say Pino's death, but no, not even close.
No, not even. No, I would say the biggest, my favorite moments, we can just make this a general conversation. My favorite moments in Eden Zero are, and spoiler alert for anyone who's not caught up at this point, although at this point I don't even know why you're even listening, but Drac and Joe killing Shiki, Witch's sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
Shiki versus Shura.
Mm-hmm.
So those are my top 3 in that order. As far as 4 and 5, it's got to be one of the Ziggy moments from Owie War. I don't know which one specifically, but Ziggy in Owie War was like peak villain. Like the shit he was pulling in Owie War, killing Jaguar, faking out Poseidon, right? Because Poseidon thought he won. He's like, haha, just kidding, bitch. Like the shit he was pulling, people were like, oh man, is this Mashima's best villain ever? At that time, right? So I don't know which one, but one of those would be number 4. And
What
number
about this isn't in the Awoi War, but what about the whole Ziggy Ishiki reveal?
yeah, honestly, that would probably be number 4, and then one of the Ziggy moments from the Owie War would be number 5. But in that order, Drac and Joe, Witch, Shiki versus Shura, then the Ziggy reveal stuff in Kaede War, then one of the Ziggy moments from Owie War. Which, now that I list those out in my head, it kind of speaks to everything we've been saying, because, you know, we keep talking about like how great Owie War is, and, you know, if I put a gun to your head and say list your top 5 moments, a lot of them, or at least most of them, are gonna be from Owie War. I feel like, I don't know. I'm gonna put a gun to your head, virtually.
Oh no!
Tell me right now. You don't have that much time to think. I'm putting you on the spot. What would you say, in no particular order? I kind of knew my order, in no particular order. But if you can, 1 through 5, top 5 moments in all of Eden Zero right now. This can change, but at least right now.
Well, what I was actually gonna say was to back up your top 5. If you go and you ask anyone what their top 5 would be, 9 or 8 times out of 10, those top 5 that you listed will probably be everybody's top 5.
Yeah. Especially
so, like,
the Drac and Joe moment.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the problems with Eden Zero, is that, like, you might find a couple other people that have the Weiss pulling up his Arsenal mask moment and telling Hermit that he's there for her. That might be in somebody's top 5. But almost every single person is going to have their top 5 be exactly like that. Where if you go and you talk about somebody's top 5 in Fairy Tail, you won't have such a narrow list for everyone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or you go to something like One Piece or One Punch Man, you go to a bunch of other series and ask them that. So it's kind of an unfortunate thing, but that also does happen with a series that's shorter, but like at the same time the series is still like 300 chapters long. So I think we just needed, and this is an overzealous thing to say, but we needed a couple more iconic moments, not just with Shiki and all that, but with some other characters too.
Yeah, and that's a good transition point into what I wanted to talk about next, actually. So now that we've had like a month to mull it over, obviously you haven't read as much as of Rave, but in everything you've read from Mashima, what, it doesn't have to necessarily be Fairy Tail, but how would you say this falls in all of the Mashima verse, like all his works? Because for me, I would probably say I would give Fairy Tail a bit of an edge over Eden Zero. I don't think Eden Zero is that far behind. And then I would probably place Rave in a very close third. And I think the only reason I would place Rave in third is because Rave, in the end, had such a great cast of characters, but the issue was like half of the team in that story doesn't really get added until like the later arcs. And a few of them aren't even a part of the team, until like the very last few arcs. So if Rave had been like even like 50 chapters longer, like one or two more arcs, I might have had Rave over Eden Zero. But looking at the starts of the series, I don't know, it's tough because people like to trash on Fairy Tail for like, oh, it's low stakes in the beginning and the first arcs are boring. I could not believe how fast Fairy Tail ramps up, at least in the manga. The anime, that's another thing with filler and all that. Excuse me. With Fairy Tail, like the stuff with Gray and the demon, right, and his backstory, you get that by chapter 23. I don't know where Eden Zero is by chapter 23. If I had to guess, that's like the stuff with of course I always blank on my characters here. Sister, right? I think that's around the time they were meeting Sister. So let me see. But my point being, right, that
it's not to cut you off, but it's right in the middle of their rescuing Rebecca because she got kidnapped.
Yep. Okay. So I was ballpark. So to compare that to where Fairy Tail was at around the same time, I mean, Fairy Tail ramps up really fast. And then it's like basically right after that you get the Phantom Lord arc, right? The arc where we get introduced to Juvia and oh my god, of course. I'm just going to blank on everybody. Gaggia, thank you, right? And that's a huge arc. Maybe it's not everyone's like, top 10 or top 5, but that's a huge arc. And that arc is so good going back. Eden Zero is different. Eden Zero is almost, and I keep making the comparisons to Rave, but I think anyone who reads Rave will agree a lot of Eden Zero is a return to Rave. Structurally speaking, it's a lot like Rave because in the beginning of Rave, like, the story does ramp up, but like it's a lot of like, okay, we're gonna go to this village and then we meet the big bad there and then we're gonna go to this village, right? It's kind of like the start of One Piece. And you get a lot of that in Eden Zero, right? Like they go to one planet and they meet a character and then they go to another planet and they meet a character and it takes its time, right? So if you're a Fairy Tail fan and an Eden Zero fan, it's kind of tough because Fairy Tail starts, small, but like picks up fast. Eden Zero, starts small, takes its time, but then it blows up, right? Like it hits so many plot points. And Fairy Tail starts fast, goes on a nice slope, and then by like chapter, I don't know, like 200 maybe, towards like, I don't know, maybe the Grand Magic Games is kind of where sort of maybe Mashima starts running out of stuff that he had planned out. But I've gone on my tangent. We can talk more about comparisons. How are you feeling? I don't know how much of other Mashima stuff you've read, but how are you kind of feeling about Eden Zero in the context of the whole Mashima verse?
Well, from what I've read of Rave, I automatically have to put it at number 3 because I haven't read all of it. I think it's good. I like it, but yeah, I just haven't read enough of it. And yeah, for me, Fairy Tale still reigns supreme as Mashima's best work. There was a time when I was reading Eden Zero and I was looking at everything that was being done, and I was like, this has the potential to surpass Fairy Tale for me, because the highs were incredibly high. But if you just go beat for beat, moment for moment between both of those series, it's just like completely, it's almost incomparable, because Fairy Tale just has so many more better moments and just so many more moments in general. Like I can't look at Eden Zero and be like, yeah, uh, this moment surpasses the relationship and the buildup between Gray and Silver, or this character surpasses Zareth's entire character arc. I can't. So Fairy Tale still reigns supreme, and I mean it's still going with 100 Years Quest. So like, and that has some pretty well written moments in it too. So Fairy Tale is still at the top. uh, Mashima had the opportunity to surpass Fairy Tale, but something happened along the way. Maybe that also wasn't even his goal to begin with. So let me not like put those words in his mouth. Like this was his goal. He wanted to surpass Fairy Tale with Eden Zero, but you know, things happen. Ball was dropped at a couple times here and there, and unfortunately, despite all the good moments, it's a middle of the road Mashima series for me. Doesn't excel past a whole lot of, even like some of the one shots, although I'm not going to say the one shot is better than the entirety of Fairy Tale, but like one shot writing where you can see what the idea is and you can see what he's trying to do. I can see that with Eden Zero, and I can see where some things succeeded and some things failed, so it's right in the center for me. Even though I do rate the series highly because of my own personal enjoyment, it's still like a middle of the road Mashima series.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's something I want to talk about real quick because, in the context of Mashima stories, it does, you know, in some ways it's an improvement, in other ways it falls short of his other stories. But in terms of like just fiction in general, I mean, we're in a state, or let me put it this way. Going back to 2019, at least, we were in this state where like it was really really hard, especially in manga, but in fiction in general, video games, movies, books, whatever, it was really hard to get anything science fiction going, right? Like even in sci-fi
Mm-hmm.
games, like it was hard to get that shit going, right? Like just look at the state of Star Wars, arguably the biggest sci-fi IP of all time, right? Like say what you will about Disney and their policies, but like part of that aside from Disney is like I think people are just kind of sick of Star Wars. Like on the one hand, people will always love Star Wars, but like on the other hand, people are just kind of sick of all the Star Wars content, right? And a lot of that I think is just like I don't know what it is, but I think just the genre is in kind of a stale state right now. Um, it isn't until like recent years with movies like Dune where it's made a bit of a comeback. I mean, you had, I don't know about the first movie, but the second Dune movie, huge, right? It's like one of the biggest movies of the
Mm-hmm.
year. Um, you had for video games, you had that one FromSoft game where it was like a reboot. It was like Rubicon or like the Mechas of Rubicon, something like
Armored
that.
Core 6.
Armored Core, yeah, Armored Core. You know, very niche game, but for what it was, that was a pretty good game, right? For manga, like, there's just not a ton of sci-fi stuff that's really, you know, resonating with people. The only I mean, it's only until recent that you're kind of seeing a comeback. Like you have Gundam, The Witch of Mercury. Um, I don't know. I would say it's mainstream, but a lot of people liked that anime. Cyberpunk, had a tough debut at first, but then the anime came out and people loved that anime, right? Like, love that anime. Still a massively popular anime. So, to tie it back to Eden Zero, when this series started and Mashima made the transition from fantasy, which is like such a no brainer, like everyone loves fantasy, to sci fi, that was huge. Especially back in 2019 when nothing is biting, like nothing is working for sci-fi. So to that sense, like I kind of have to give Mashima credit for doing what he did. Like it definitely wasn't his best-selling series compared to Fairy Tail at least. But considering the state of science fiction, especially in anime and manga, when he started this series, and like how much he did it well, right? Like you look at Eden Zero, like just in a vacuum, like forget Fairy Tail, forget anime and manga, forget whatever, and you just think about all the cool sci-fi stuff in the series, like the video game planet, like the robots, like the overdrives and abilities, the galaxies and the spaceships, and like the power suits, right? And the androids. Mashima made such a cool science fiction story in a time where people could not give a shit about science fiction. And for that, I do have to give respect to Mashima.
It was definitely a bold choice because from what I hear, like science fiction isn't super popular over in Japan. So him deciding to make something like Eden Zero is definitely commendable. I just, as far as the whole like Star Wars thing goes, one, I think it all depends on writing more than just aesthetic, but at the same time, fantasy is just like such a, I don't know what the term is, like it's like a bunt, it's like a home run. You're
It's
at least
it's
gonna
just
get
a no-brainer. Like it's just so
yeah.
stupidly popular and successful. Like I mean, you look
You
at
can
the
easily get people in the door with that.
you
Yeah.
look at the uh disgusting amount of isekai anime that just because they're isekai they get views. It's like to it would have been so easy for him to do fantasy and he's like, "No, I want to do something different."
Yeah, and I think one of the things is like because I see a lot of people talking about in the chat, what about this series? What about this series? It depends on how sci-fi you go that will turn some people off.
Yes.
So yeah, you
Mhm.
have things like Dragon Ball where there are sci-fi elements, but if you go to the Namek world, you don't look at that and be like, oh, that's such a high sci-fi s. No, it still looks like a fantasy world. There's just some technology in it. So you kind of have to find a blend between fantasy and sci-fi if you really want your series to work in Japan. And I think Mashima went a little bit too sci-fi, and that probably turned a couple people off.
I mean, just look at One Piece, right? I mean, One Piece has a lot of science fiction stuff going on, but it's really more steampunk, I guess. I mean, it does have robots
Yeah.
and stuff like that, but if you really boiled it down, it's probably more in line with something like steampunk. Um, Dragon Ball, like, it's really just like a common sense thing. Like, if I said, name your top 3 favorite science fiction series, I, I would be hard to believe that the first thing that came to your brain would be, oh, well, Dragon Ball, obviously. Or like, oh, yeah, my favorite science fiction anime is Naruto, right? Or something like that. Like, everything can have a little bit of science fiction, but the thing with actual science fiction series is like it's about, space battles and robots and time travel and stuff like that. And for whatever reason, it's just kind of harder to sell those stories, especially with anime. Anime is just in a state where, like, even mecha series, right? Like, I mean, Gundam used to be, and, just for legacy reasons, still is huge in Japan. But, like, if somebody in Shonen Jump was to try and do a mecha manga today, it would probably tank because for whatever reason, it's just really hard to do science fiction right now. And for that, I have to give Mashima a ton of credit. Another thing with Eden Zero is maybe he didn't do so much, in the later arcs, but at least going up to Aoi War, the characters in this story are phenomenal. I mean, definitely, in my opinion, better than the characters in Rave. I'll just say that. At least in the first half, right? But I mean, the chemistry with the characters is so good. Like, you have Witch, Sister, Hermit, right? You have Wise. Like, just the chemistry of this crew was so goddamn good. So, I mean, I'm not going to get into fairy tale comparisons, but it's so hard to, like, get a really good crew of characters. And I feel like at least when he started, Mashima hit it out of the park.
Yeah, I mean, he was really good at having that interpersonal dialogue and those moments between the characters. I mean, there's a ton of funny moments in between Shiki and Weiss and Shiki and the rest of the Shining Stars, and just the interpersonal dynamics between the crew was fantastic. And I genuinely think if you take that crew and you take those characters and you put it in a different setting, the series is far more popular. Again, because of that whole sci-fi thing. But the writing between those characters is so good, it could succeed on its own.
So one thing I want to talk about before, I'm not going to end it soon, but one thing I definitely want to talk about as someone who loves this series is, like, bro, they really killed our anime. Like, season 1, season 1 was okay, right? Like, it got new fans, people liked it. It was far from a 10 out of a 10, but, JC staff did their thing. The shit that happened with season 2 was, I would put it in, like, Stone Ocean levels of just drop the ball. And to be fair, a lot of it wasn't, like, any one person's fault. A lot of it was they were going through that whole Disney negotiation thing with, like, Kodansha giving I forget what the deal was, or what the deal is now, but, like, Kodansha, all their series go to Hulu and Disney now. And for whatever reason, Eden Zero didn't make the cut, I don't think. So when season 2 came out, nobody knew what the hell it was going to be on. So then by the time it came out, they were just like, it's on Crunchyroll, because why not? And
yeah, I really had no idea what happened. But
exactly.
Season 1 was, like, if I remember when it came out on Netflix, it was like top 3.
It was
like
pretty
9
popular.
9 million viewers or something like that.
It was pretty popular. I remember specifically a lot of people, because I was making a lot of Eden Zero videos back then. I was getting a good number of people pulling up to either, like, streams or videos saying like, hey, I just found out about this on Netflix and I'm getting into it. So season 1 was more or less a success. It didn't become like a mainstream success, but for a first season, they hit the mark. And then with season 2, I think it's like the same story as Stone Ocean, where all the shit with the streaming just kind of killed the hype, even with hardcore Eden Zero fans. So like by the time it came out, like you don't have, and I think part of it too was kind of what happened with Tokyo Revengers, because with season 1 of Tokyo Revengers, people were losing their minds over chapters of the manga. So when the anime came out for Tokyo Revengers, manga fans were like, oh my god, you have to watch this. It's the best thing ever. Eden Zero, same thing. Eden Zero season 1 comes out. Eden Zero fans are like, oh my god, you have to watch it. It's the best thing ever. Then season 2 of Tokyo Revengers came out, and all the shit happened with that ending, right? Where the series creator was just like recycling everything, and everyone who loved the manga was like, yeah, this shit sucks now. So going into season 2, all those people who hyped up season 1, like, gone, right? They left town. Around the time of season 2, if I recall, that was around the same time as Kaede War, right? If I remember correctly. Because I think season 2 came out like 2021, maybe 2022, which was around the same time as Kaede War, if I'm not mistaken. So, while part of it was the streaming stuff, I think another big part of it was just like Eden Zero fans kind of shooting themselves in the foot.
I don't know if it did season 2 come out at the Kaede War? I thought that was Universe Zero.
I'm gonna find out right now, but
I think it was afterwards.
What do you think about kind of the rise and fall of the anime?
I think to put it plainly, it's a damn shame. Because season 1, I'm a big critique of the anime and a big critique of JC staff, because I was a ride or die for Eden Zero back then. I was like, yo, you put enough money into this thing, because that was still at the peak of Eden Zero. I was like, you put enough money into this thing, you put enough talented staff onto this, and you're gonna have something truly incredible. And well, even though I liked season 1, I was like, I found it lacking in a couple areas. Like, you guys can definitely do better with this material. You can definitely do better in the animation department and just improve it all around. The color palette, we can change that up for season 2. We can do something incredible. We had a good starting line, we had a good starting basis. Now with the next season, let's just launch forward and truly drive this thing and make it a huge success, because season 2 was if I'm not mistaken, that was Drake and Joe, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
it would have been like the middle of season 2.
Yeah, and we had that amazing episode 10. That was probably the best episode inside of Eden Zero. But after that, it kind of just took a bit of a nosedive, because the animation really started lacking at parts, and they didn't change up the color palette, and a whole lot of stuff was still the same. So I felt like we kind of dropped the ball, and you add all that stuff that happened with the whole streaming rights and development and all that. It was just a whole recipe for disaster, and that's what it eventually turned out to be. And I don't even know if we're gonna get a season 3. I think we might, because we did get a tease at the end of season 2. But as far as what happens after that, I don't even know if the Eden Zero anime is gonna wrap up and cover Universe Zero and the ending of the I just don't know. Rave Master, the anime for that didn't finish, so if Mashima wants it, I'm sure it'll happen, but if he doesn't, then we're not seeing it.
So I was basically right. So, at least according to Wikipedia, episode 26, so the beginning of season 2, the original air date was April 2nd, 2023. So, coinciding with the manga, that would have been like chapter 235 ish. So that would have been in the new time loop when they went back to Sun Jewel and they reunited with Homura again, and now uh what's her name? Lady Crimson, Homura's mom, her biological mom,
Madame Kurenai.
Madame Kurenai, thank you. She was a good guy now. That's where they were in the manga. So, of course, I agree with everything you said, but I do think part of it was like by the time season 2 came out, we were in the time loop, and you know, I think a lot of people who were like the hive leaders of the community kind of just like fell off the face of the earth just with what was going on in the manga. So I think that was a part of it too.
Yeah. And also, now that you brought it up, we do have to talk about Universe Zero. We talked about Cade, we talked about the highs and the highs.
Mm-hmm.
I think we got to talk about the. I mean, it's a toss up for me between which I think is worse, Cade and Universe Zero. I mean, I think at the end of Universe Zero, things got a whole lot better. But that whole beginning part, and I think you even put out a video at that time talking about what was going on
I did,
at that
yeah.
beginning part of Eden Zero, Universe Zero. That was a real rough time.
Yeah. I don't know. It was. I think. So I specifically remember the biggest complaint people had about that arc was like so much of Eden Zero prior to that, especially in the previous 2 arcs. And with Belial Gore, like, not necessarily because of Mashima's intentions. In fact, I don't even think he intended Eden Zero to be this way. But in a lot of ways, this was the darkest story he had ever told, right? Like, Fairy Tail has dark arcs, especially with like the E&D stuff and the demons. Like, that was a pretty dark arc in some ways. But just with the shit going on, like, you know, Shiki getting shot in the back of the head, people getting stabbed in the gut, tortured. I mean, what the hell was Shura's girlfriend? Like, the shit he was doing to her.
She got a bomb in her rectum or something like that.
Yeah, she put a bomb up her butt. It was just like, bro, what the hell is going on? And then you go to Universe Zero, and it's just sunshine and unicorns and rainbows, and everyone's best friend. And like, you get to, I specifically remember by the time we got to the Universe Zero Drac and Joe, people were like, what the shit, right? People were like, my man was like the Michael Corleone of Fairy Tail in space, and now he's just another Mashima character. So I think that was, at least in my experience, what a lot of people didn't like about that arc. Now, me personally, I liked it. I knew Mashima. I wasn't like, you know, in love with it. I did kind of think at some points it dragged on. But as far as like the light stuff, you know, like kind of changing tone, I did like it because, you know, in a sense, it was like a redemption for some of these characters. I do think he did it better with some characters than others. Like, I remember when we got back to Drac and Joe, we found out that Poseidon was working with him. And I just remember thinking like, okay, this is a thing, I guess. Sure, why not? So, I don't know. He did it better with other characters, but I did like generally what he was doing.
Yeah, for me, I was definitely one of those people, because when we got the flip, there was the idea, I think it was Rebecca's mom that said that things are going to be like wildly different, or things could be wildly different in this world. It could be for the better, or it could be for the worse. And I was like, okay, well, judging on how Eden Zero has gone so far, we might get some good stuff, but there's definitely going to be some bad stuff in here. And then as Universe Zero was progressing, I was just waiting for the flip. I was like, okay, we got this. All right, now what's gonna happen that's bad? Oh, nothing. Oh, okay, on to the next arc. Okay, we're getting all this. We're getting all this. Okay, some stuff happened with Madame Kernai, but when's the flip and things really get bad? Oh, nope. Okay, on to the next. So it was just like that over and over and over again. And it was the fact that we had already been through all of this before, and there were just some slight tweaks. And in addition to that, everything was also just happy. I was just like, man, there's a whole lot more that you could do with what's going on right now. And we just, and you had to do my man's Drake and Joe like that. Like, come on.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of my favorite characters. He was such a beast. He's smashing glass in people's mouths, and now he's like, I don't know. Still wake up at night in a cold sweat. What they did to my boy.
While we're still on the topic of villains, and we're gonna get into the area of hot take territory, going back to almost 2 years ago when we did our collab, let's talk about. We talked about where Eden Zero ranks in the Mashima verse. And now that we had all the Universe Zero stuff, right? And that was another thing, right? Was that like, you know, people were saying like, oh, well, they're different villains. You have like Drac and Joe from the original timelines and Universe Zero, Drac and Joe, right? So that's a whole nother conversation. But let's talk again. You're only so far in Rave, so we won't talk about Rave so much. But let's talk fairy tale villains versus Eden Zero villains. Where do Ziggy, Shura, Drac and Joe, and some of your other favorites rank against some of your top fairy tale villains? And how has that changed from, 2 years ago?
Well, I think
And just for context, this can include both versions of a character, so like Universe 1 and their original iteration, or it could include just their like super edgy original version. Whatever, however you view the character, your experience with the character.
I think again, I just gotta, in terms of overall villains, I just gotta edge it out to Fairy Tail, because if Mashima didn't do that whole Universe Zero, and I know they're different characters from their other counterparts, I get that, but like, this is the Drake and Joe that I have now. This is the Shura that I have now.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Ziggy that I have now, and like they're good in their own right, but at the same time, it's like, man, can I say that Drake and Joe was better than Loxus as a character? And I know that's like a completely different subject, but like,
Yeah.
let me refocus here. But as villains, it's like they were good for their time, but these are the characters that we have now. So like,
Mm-hmm.
am I saying any of them are better than Acnologia? And that's kind of a low bar from a writing standpoint, but from personal perspective, Acnologia is just far and above any of these characters. And if we even want to go for writing, Zareth, oh my gosh, in terms of lethality and as like a well-written antagonist,
Yeah.
he's better than all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, just like with going moment for moment between the series, there are some individual moments that really make these villains stand out. And Shura, for one, his writing with Shiki was just like incredible. It actually kind of reminds me of like Mahito and Yuji a bit. Not the whole I'm you bit, but like just how much of a lethal antagonist this dude was in Shiki's life. It was extremely well written, and I really, really like that. So in terms of like the Mashima villain tier list, he's definitely up near the top. And I still have a whole lot of respect for Drake and Joe as well. He's near the top too, but I don't know. And we even had who was a better villain when we made that whole collab video, and I had Drake and Joe above Shura. But thinking about the whole thing in retrospective, I think I actually have to give it to Shura now. because just like the damage that they did to Draken was just so much worse than what they did to Shura. So it's oh my gosh.
I forget specifically what my conclusion was in the video, but I think I'm still at the same point of Draken Joe is still my favorite villain in Eden Zero, and he's still one of my favorite villains in all of the Mashima verse. But I
Okay.
think in all of Rave, Fairy Tale, and now Eden Zero, I would probably argue that Shura is the greatest foil that Mashima has ever written. Not even antagonist
Ooh, okay.
necessarily, not villain, but he is the greatest foil that Mashima has ever written. Because he was such a perfect anti-Shiki, and the shit he was pulling was diabolical. It was like Geneva Convention level shit. And people, you got to understand, right? This is peak Eden Zero community. For anyone who wasn't a part of it at this time, people hated this character. I mean, like, loved him because he was such a good villain, but I mean, they hated this character too. And I felt a certain way about this villain that so few foils or even villains make me feel in any fiction. So maybe he's not as good in hindsight as, Zareth, but at least as a foil, I would probably say he's the best foil or antagonist that Mashima has ever written to this day.
I actually think the way that it goes for me is probably Acnologi is my favorite antagonist. I see him as like this malevolent overlording force of the or was the overlording force of the fairy tale verse. He was just like this force of nature, this being that couldn't be stopped, and he's my personal favorite. From a writing perspective, Zareth definitely takes the cake. He's probably the best well-written antagonist in the series. But like you said, for like an actual foil for the main character, thinking about it, he is probably the best written foil for the main. I mean, we'll see what Ignia does in 100 Years Quest.
Yeah, that's true.
But as of right now, he probably is Mashima's best well-written foil for a main character. Just their interpersonal dialogue and the way that he so heavily clashed with Shiki's ideals. It's just a match made in heaven in terms of a writing perspective.
Yeah, I mean, he really nailed it out of the park. And I mean, if we're going to tie it to Rave Master, you have Lucia, right? Lucia and
That's the guy in the
Haru.
black armor.
I don't know if he had the black armor, but he was like his Elias was he was the blonde devil. He was the final villain. And he had blonde hair, and he was like basically the same age as Haru. They had a pretty good thing going as far as like, their rivalry, and Lucia is an antagonist. But I don't think that comes close to Shiki and Shura. And I mean, even Lucia was doing some pretty sick shit. I mean, spoiler, but not really. In his introduction to Haru's group, he pulls up to a huge fight, walks up to Ellie, who, like, at that time, Haru and Ellie are still doing. They're like, haha, we like each other. Haha. Lucia pulls up and just like straight up like makes out with her, and he's like, yeah, what's up? And you're like, what? That would be like if Shura jumped on the Eden Zero, found Rebecca, made out with her, and then just like called Shiki on his phone and gave him the finger and was like, okay, let's fight. But
all right,
even then, the shit that Shura was doing still tops that. So I mean,
Shuro was also like a master strategist, and I
yes.
remember when he broke into the Eden Zero, messed up the Shining Stars, and then we got that reveal that he kidnapped Witch, and he was like, "All right, Shiki, let's see what you do now." Like I said, he's literally like the Mahito of the Eden Zero universe. He's so well written.
So we are getting close to the 2 hour mark. So I have one more question, and then we can kind of start to transition into closing remarks and whatnot, final thoughts. We talked about villains, we talked about some of our other hot takes. Final hot take for the stream: out between Fairy Tail and Eden Zero. Doesn't necessarily have to be, like the most epic fight, but just like, what resonated with you the most, or was the most shocking. What are like top 3 best fights between Eden Zero and Fairy Tail that Mashima has ever written? I'll start. I think
Okay.
in this is going to be in no particular order. And these are going to be some hot takes. I would say number 3, and this is kind of a spoiler, so I will spoil you for this, but just because it's so insanely epic. In Rave, Sighart's fight against all the wizards. And I'll just spoil it, but because you have to have the context to understand why it's so epic. So Sighart was like the first Jelal, right? Like that was the Rave Jelal. In that one, he's insanely OP. But he comes back to his village, which it's a city of wizards. And he comes to find out that one of the villains came to his city and conspired with the head wizard. So now, not only does he have to beat the evil wizard, but he has to fight the mayor of the wizards. But before he can fight the mayor of the wizards, he has to fight 1,000 wizards that are like all his friends.
Holy crap.
So
okay.
It's a fight over the course of like 3 chapters where Sighart, he takes out 1,000 wizards without killing them, then fights the strongest of the 1,000 wizards, and then he fights the evil wizard for like 24 hours, or it was either 48 hours or 72 hours, at least 24 hours, without sleeping, without eating, and still kicks his ass. And that was going all the way back in Rave. So that's my number 3. My number 2, I'm leaning towards probably Shiki versus Shura. And then my number 1, I almost want to say, I don't know what my favorite Fairy Tail fight is. I almost want to say probably Natsu and Gajiel versus Laxus. And that's kind of a hot take.
Okay.
If I go back, I'm sure I can think of something better. But just like artistically, in early Fairy Tail, that was probably the best looking fight he ever drew. Like, even including the stuff in Grand Magic games. So probably after Grand Magic games, something in there would probably be my number 1, but gun to my head asking me right now, Natsu and Gajiel versus Laxus. Now,
I'll tell you right now, that's on my top 3 too.
Okay, thank God. So, on that note, I'll turn the tables to you. In all the Mashima-verse, and it can be 0 Fairy Tail fights, or it could be all Fairy Tail fights, what are your top 3 Mashima fights?
I don't know the ranking of the top 3, but I know one of them is definitely Gray versus Silver.
Yes, that's a great fight.
That one for me is just like the fight in and of itself is pretty cool, but the ending where Silver is asking his own son to like finish him off,
Mm-hmm.
it's just a fantastic ending to that fight, and the whole dynamic with Juvia attached to it as well, and she
Mm-hmm.
has to be the one to actually like it's fantastic. And my other favorite one is, like you already mentioned, Loxus and Gajiel, or Natsu and Gajiel versus Loxus.
Mm-hmm.
I, at least every couple of months, will come back to the ending of that fight because it's also just so good. I love that fight. I think the Battle of Fairy Tail arc is probably top 5 in terms of Fairy Tail arcs, because Loxus as a character is just one of my favorites, and he's one of the best written characters in that series.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole fight at the ending, with Fairy Law and all that, and the redirection of the lightning, because Gajiel uses the iron, and then Natsu lays out all those attacks, and you get that vicious roar right at the end. It's amazing.
Yeah, not
And
to cut you
then,
off, I'm sorry, but I totally agree, because when I did my read through a fairy tale recently, and I did my fairy tale video on like what happened to fairy tale, it was crazy. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but like it's crazy how fast fairy tale ramps up and like how many peaks it has early on. And as of now, at least, I would say the Battle of Fairy Tail arc was, at least in early Fairy Tail, Mashima's best arc he had ever written. And
mhm.
it's because that arc was so good that that's where I thought it started to taper off for a bit. Like going from Battle of Fairy Tail, um, going from that to Oración Seis, I really didn't like Oración Seis compared to Battle of Fairy Tail. I still think it's a solid arc and it has a lot of good moments, but compared to Battle of Fairy Tail and just how good that arc is, I'm like, no, Battle of Fairy Tail is better.
I think you can definitely go bat for bat with the endings, and it's really just I think up to personal opinion if you like the fight between Natsu and Zero over the fight between Loxus and Gajiel and Natsu.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it always does tip back towards, because I've watched and seen that fight with Loxus far more times than I've seen the Natsu versus Zero fight, even though it is still a good fight
Mm-hmm.
in its own right.
Now, again, I cut you off, so we have Gray and Silver. We have the Laxus fight. Do we have a third fight?
Again, I think I might have to take off your list again and go Shiki versus Shura, because if we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that you said was what's a fight that resonates with you. I think the ending of that, I mean, the whole fight, the spurts that they had in between, how incredibly well drawn it was at the beginning and the whole way throughout. But the ending of that fight, where I don't want to mess up the quote, but I don't think I won't be able to find it in time, where Shiki's like, I'm not competing with the people around me to get to the top. I'm focusing on myself, and we're all going to excel to the top together. I think that's one of the, like, even in my own life, that's just like one of the best pieces of it's weird to say advice, but just like one of the best lessons. Like, not everything is a competition between this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. You need to compete with yourself and grind to the top. Don't really worry about the people that are beside you,
Mm-hmm.
unless they conflict with you at the end of the day, but pursue what you need to do and block out the distractions. I just think it's a great lesson, and it's a great piece of advice, and that's why it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, man. Mashima, as much as people like to meme on him for how he writes fights, when you really sit down and start to talk about your favorites, you're like, damn. They're not always bangers, but when they are, they're pretty damn good.
When they hit, they hit.
When they hit, they hit. Luke actually brought up something. I know I said we were going to do one more hot take, but we'll do one more. He said top 5. I'll do 3. Who are your 3 favorite characters in the Mashima verse? I'll start it off. I'll give you some time to think about it. I would say Erza. That's not even a question. This is in no particular order. Erza's one of them. That's not even up for debate. Wise. And then Wise, Erza, and who else do I want to say? That's a tough one. Who do I want to throw in there? I'm almost tempted to say Gajil. Honestly, gun to my head, putting me on the spot, I would say probably Erza, Wise, and Gajil. What about you?
Top 3, I can just spout these off real quick. Acnologia, Loxus, and Hamura.
Yeah. Honestly, Homura's up there. That's a pretty safe top 3.
Acnologia, just because of personal bias. Loxus, he just looks cool and his writing is great, and the same applies to Hamura. She was really, her time in what was it? I can't even remember the art. Sun Jewel.
All right. Well, this has been a phenomenal discussion. We've had a ton of great, recollections, callbacks, and I think for anyone who's an Eden Zero fan, this has been, a perfect retrospective. So to cap it off, to sort of recapture the magic of the beginning and sort of put a nice final note on things, let me ask you this. Let's say, you have someone on your channel, or you run into somebody and they ask you, hey, I heard you're an Eden Zero fan. It's over. I'm thinking of getting into it. Just in, a minute or so, right? Just in a small pitch. At least right now, why would you say Eden Zero is worth getting into? Like, what is the best part of the Eden Zero, and why is it still worth reading now that it's over?
I'd have to give it up to the characters, because even when the overall story might falter a bit, you can always rely on Mashima to have characters that will make you laugh, characters that will pull emotion out of you, and characters that will make you root for the fights that they're in. They're always entertaining. They're always going to bring a smile to your face when you get attached to them, and you'll get attached to them fairly quickly because they are so dynamic. And when you see all of these characters and how different they are and how they interact with each other, it's just, the ride becomes that much more fun. And as the cast grows and we get people like Laguna and all of that, it's a fun and entertaining ride, and you're gonna enjoy it, and you're gonna laugh, and you're gonna it's gonna be a great time.
I couldn't agree more. Characters are probably the biggest reason to get into this series. Some of my favorite Mashima characters ever, and some of my favorite characters in manga ever. And the only other thing I'll add to that is it's just a exciting sci-fi adventure. I mean, if you love One Piece, if you love Rave, you'll love the early stuff, and it's just got a ton of cool stuff in it, like robots, like space power-up nonsense, like space fights, starfighter fights, time travel. If you're looking for a sci-fi manga in a ocean of isekai and fantasy, you could not ask for a better series than Eden Zero. And also, it's got amazing characters. But on that note, I think at this point, we've done Eden Zero justice. So on that note, Iron Nancy, I just want to say thank you for joining me for the stream. It's been great chatting with you again. This was a phenomenal discussion. Hopefully you had as much fun as I did, so I cannot thank you enough.
Oh, absolutely. This was awesome. I'm glad I got to come on here and just like have a real good long chat and discussion about the series. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
Talking
this
about
was
what we love, talking about the faults, all that.
yeah, it was a nice way to sort of like put a cap on Eden Zero, because I think for a lot of people, especially with the community kind of gone, it just kind of ended in the void. So for everyone in the community, this is a nice opportunity to kind of come together and talk about things and kind of like put it to bed in a way. But for everyone who tuned in for the stream, I just want to say this has been one of the best turnouts for a stream in a while, and the chat was amazing. So thank you for everyone in the stream. And I said it a few times already, but I just want to thank everyone for 5 years on the channel. Obviously, this was mostly an Eden Zero thing, but this was a nice way to celebrate my 5th year on YouTube. So I had a ton of fun, and it's streams like this that remind me, you know, we have a great community here, and I'm looking forward to everything coming up in the future. So we'll end it on that note. Thank you to everyone. I linked Iron Nancy's channel in the chat, so make sure to check him out, especially if you want content on 100 Years Quest or just Fairy Tail in general, or if you just want to follow a cool dude and you're looking for cool dudes in the anime and manga YouTube community. Iron Nancy, do you have anything else you want to say before we close things out?
Just thanks to everybody for showing up. Chat was engaging, chat was involved, a couple arguments in there, chat was funny, it was awesome. It was a great time.
Thank you, everyone. Again, great stream, great time. Thank you for 5 years. Thank you for all the great years of Eden Zero, and thank you for a great discussion. On that note, I look forward to hearing from all of you soon.